I am not Martin Luther King, but I have a dream. I dream of living in a realistic world among rational characters where people measure what can be averted and what cannot. But instead, I shall admit that I find myself here among irrational humans only looking for spreading confusion and fake pieces of information around the world. As a matter of fact, dear opponents, what we are going to be saying today is reality. Ladies and gentlemen, respected audience, honorable juries, classmates and opponents, greetings. May you have one of those greatest afternoons watching our debates and choosing to hear the brightest side of the world, us. Today's motion has been a very controversial one for years, but nowadays people actually got convinced. It just appears that there are still exceptions in the world. We should adapt to climate change rather than avert it. Now we, as today's government, strongly believe that it is true. But before we start going deeper in today's topic, allow me to start by clarifying and defining some of the main important terms. 1. Adapt. Adapt means to change behaviors that it's easier to function in a particular place or a situation. 2. Avert. Avert means to prevent. And according to the Cambridge Dictionary, preventing is to definitely stop something from happening. Thus, saying that we can stop climate change now, once and for all, would be absurd. Ladies and gentlemen, change has been underway for a long time. Industrialization and the massive use of Earth will not stop. The phenomenon has been going for way too long. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in the short term, the phenomenon will be irreversible. We will therefore have to adapt or disappear. Aversion will not in any case make it go. Plus, not even everyone has the power to avert it. However, everyone will need to adapt, since change is inevitable and always has been. Humans have been adapting to climate change literally since our ancestors came down out of the trees. We have adapted to ice ages and interglacials. We have adapted to tropical forests, to high altitudes and life below sea level. Humans are supremely adaptable. Now, in climate change research, adaptation used to be a dirty word 20 years ago. And according to research at the University of Regina, at the time of 1992, scientists used to argue that we can still prevent climate change. But nowadays, it is clear for most climate scientists that it is too late to prevent. And adaptation is widely seen as fundamental, as our planet has already warmed up by 1 degree Celsius. If you guys still see that we can prevent climate change, then y'all are living in a fairy tale where everything is pink and superheroes are everywhere. But as far as I know, you are not Superman, neither Batman. So for God's sake, do not even try to compare our real world to a certain Marvel movie. It is not even about being optimistic anymore. Ladies and gentlemen, it's about being realistic. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Prime Minister, I think we should give a definition of climate change before starting. Climate change mitigation and adaptation are often discussed as stuff they are interchangeable. Well, they're not. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow citizens, dear governments, and honorable juries. Let's talk about the reason we met today, climate change, which is how the characteristics of the weather we experience in a certain place change. It can get hotter or wetter on average, or have more concentrated rain in a short period, but then get longer dry periods. All of that can be a result of climate change. So, in your opinion, what is most affected by this disaster? Let me answer you. Water. These latter is involved at all levels of the climate system. These presence create a close and reciprocal relationship between water and climate. As we all know, water is extremely mobile, which allows us to navigate between the atmospheres and terrestrial reservoirs, like oceans, rivers, lakes, or even glaciers. Let's take as an example the case of Europe. It is affected by climate change, and the effects are not only being felt on Earth. European bodies of water, the lakes, rivers, and the ocean that surround the continent are also affected. Given that there is more water than land on the Earth's surface, it is no surprise that warming since the 1950s. Increased gas emissions greenhouse effect, the most important being billion carbon dioxide, which in turn has trapped more and more solar energy in the atmospheres. Coming back to the glaciers, and exactly the melting ones. The melting of glaciers and ice flows is problematic because the environmental and human consequences are serious. 3 ingenious people who will be forced to migrate to survive. Sea level rise, flooding, especially of coastal areas, threatening the survival of many villages. Between 2000 and 2004, the total ice loss increased from 227 gigatons of ice per year to 298 gigatons in 2050 and 2090. In addition to this, the Earth has lost 28 trillion tons of ice in 23 years. Imagine the area of the United Kingdom completely covered with a layer of ice 100 meters thick. That's roughly the amount of ice lost since 1994 from Earth in mountain glaciers or polar regions. According to a pending study published in the journal Christopher, this carbonate satellite observation and numerical models to calculate the amount of melted ice between 1994 and 2070. 16% of the melt took place in the northern hemisphere. Mainly the ices of the Arctic 7.6 trillion tons and Greenland 3.8 trillion tons. 14% of the melt took place in the southern hemisphere, where 2,500 billion tons of islanders have notably disappeared in Antarctica. The melting of mountain glaciers represent for its part 6,200 tons of evaporated ice. Everything I just said has been endorsed by scientists who are experts in the field, and all my sources are from gift.com. I invite you to see this site. It is very interesting. Thank you.
We all had dreams during our childhood, right? Some of us dreamed about becoming a pilot, an astronaut, I don't know, maybe even a president. Spoiler alert, let me share with you the jobs that my teammates and I dreamed about, and which are kind of atypical and unusual. Somehow, I wanted to be a CEO of a fossil fuel company. Maryam, who wants to be the future CEO of Shell. Yazid, an employee in Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company. And finally, Rita, who's gonna be the next president of China, who has many factories that worsen the climate change in our world. So lucky people that we were able to realize our dreams. All of this, of course, being years of hard and personal work. And tick, and out of nowhere, we were told to prevent this phenomenon for once and all. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the juries, dear opponents, good afternoon. I'm so happy, glad, and delighted to be able to stand in front of you in here after such a long time. So, dear audience, allow me to give you a little taste of the film, or rather the short film that our dear opponents had already concocted for you. And as I mentioned in the intro before, we, out of a sudden, were told to close our factories and companies in order to stop the greenhouse effect that we are causing. Which leads me to say how paradoxical of you, dear members of opposition, to say that we should prevent something that has been here, that has been existent since forever, and that, as our dear Prime Minister said, that has been here since the generation before ours, and the other one before, and the other one before, and etc., etc. And who each one of them tried to adapt to this change rather than prevent it. Well, let me give you a concrete example. The latest ILO report showed that averting climate change will cause an economic loss of $2.4 trillion and 80 million jobs worldwide by 2030. Also, the example of Maryam, the CEO of Shell, who closed her factories alongside with its subsidiary companies. No, but dear opponents, I would have loved to ask you how can the huge number of employees who were kicked out feed their families, pay their rent, pay their bills, pay their taxes, and the list goes on. But now I simply can't ask you about that because you've lost that authority and rationality. Well, though I could totally understand your position since it's a bit delicate. Here's a really, really good news. Humans have adapted to climate change, and we are getting better at it. We are building better flood defenses, we're anticipating hotter weather, we are greening our roofs and gardens, and we're using porous paving to deal with excess water and improving its retention and use. Adaptation will pay for all of us. We'll save lives, protect nature, reduce inequalities, and create new opportunities. So here's really good advice for me to you, dear opponents. Don't stay in the nosebleeds and bark at the wind. The turf won't hear. Thank you.
First, you said the Prime Minister, Mrs. Prime Minister and Mrs. Deputy of Prime Minister, that we can adapt. But I totally disagree with this idea. And I will show to everyone that you are wrong with the words of my thesis. Humans are increasingly influencing the climate by burning fossil fuels, cutting down forests and farming livestock. This adds enormous amount of greenhouse gases to those naturally occurring in the atmosphere and increasing the greenhouse effect and global warming. The main driver of climate change is the greenhouse effect. Some gases in Earth's atmosphere act a bit like the glass in a greenhouse, trapping sun's heat and stopping it from leaking back into space and causing global warming. Many of these gases occur naturally, but human activities are increasing the concentration of some of them in the atmosphere, in particular carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases. According to the EPA, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, carbon dioxide concentration have increased considerably since the beginning of the industry era, a 46% increase. And almost all this increase is due to human activities. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to share with you a simple example that Dorothy Kriti, a student from Oxford, gave to explain one of the main causes of global warming. Let's take Earth and Venus. Earth and Venus are essentially the same size and essentially the same distance from the Sun, and both have the same amount of carbon. The difference is that over time, the carbon in Earth has been trapped under the ground, whereas on Venus, most of the carbon was in the atmosphere. The difference is that on Earth, the average temperature is around 50 degrees, whereas on Venus, it is only around 850 degrees. Not just because it is slightly closer to the Sun. Mercury is the closest to the Sun, and it is 2 times coolest than Venus. You see where I've come from, my dear opponents? This clearly explained to us that the factories that use carbon as a fuel and reject it in the atmosphere are the main cause of this global warming. Honorable public, after this, let's mention another great cause of global warming: deforestation. Trees help to regulate the climate by absorbing the CO2 from the atmosphere. When they are cut down, that beneficial effect is lost, and the carbon stored in trees is released into the atmosphere, adding to the greenhouse effect. I would like to add something. A support from Brazil's Space Research Agency found that the deforestation increased by 22% in a year. To conclude, our planet is constantly suffering from our activities, industrial as well as usual. We should stop this climate change. Ever since the industry has started, man has tried to adapt. Result of the account, we were only destroying our planet. This planet that we love so much, one day this planet that we love so much will no longer endure this suffering, and that day is approaching. We should act. Thank you, everyone.
Dear opponents, that's all very interesting, but I think that we should make use of one of the most significant features of human beings, which is the capacity of adaptation. The question here is, how can we adapt to climate change? And that is by reducing our vulnerability to its impacts. Actions such as moving to higher ground to avoid rising sea levels, or using new building technologies. These represent adaptation strategies. I would like you all to think about this for a second. We don't control the sun, we don't control the oceans. You know we live on the water planet, right? We don't control the moon, we don't control orbital mechanics, we don't control plate tectonics, we don't control earthquakes nor volcanoes. All of these have a far more profound effect on the claimants on our planet than a silly trace gas. Adaptation is about dealing with change, not by preventing it, but by learning to adapt to it and try to reduce its impact. Climate change adaptation Climate change adaptation comes from the acceptance that a change in climate is inevitable and putting in measures to allow one to more easily cope, assuming the effects can be broadly predicted. I live in Morocco, and for us, predicted climate change means higher temperatures. For others, predictions may differ. Drought, for example, measures include using buildings or using thermal mass, which is a concrete that has the ability to absorb the heat during daytime and release it at night. Solar shading, which allows buildings to cool naturally. There are, of course, lots more than this. These are just few examples. Climate experts agree that although it's too late to avoid consequences on a warming climate, it's not too late to avoid more severe impacts. Reducing the severity of climate warming will make it easier for everyone to adapt. So adaptation and mitigation must go hand in hand. So let's sum up where we stand at this point. Even if governments continue their inaction, individuals can still carry out adaptations to climate change, since the impact of companies is much bigger than the impact of people, and climate change mitigation is not a priority for them unless they can get some profit out of it. The biggest things these individuals can do is to investigate the waste companies make and publicly boycott them and shade them on that. Since these companies are not going to change, if we don't push them to act by any economic means, it's not going to happen. Thanks.
So, you said that we can't control the nature or the nature events. Of course, I totally agree. But we can control our emissions to the atmosphere. So, as the 21st century progresses, the true effects of climate change became evident. We are witnessing one disaster after another on a daily basis, compounding human suffering and misery now and for years to come. The effects of global climate change on the environment have already been observed. Ice caps have shifted. Ice on rivers and lakes has broken up earlier. Trees are blooming earlier. So how can we adapt to climate change if it is causing such devastation? Ladies and gentlemen, members of governments and honorable jury, climate change is destroying our world. First and foremost, climate change driven by human-caused emissions to the atmosphere influences the air quality we breathe. That it stands to reason that we face compromised air quality. It is affecting our health, affecting kids, and most of the diseases resulting from climate crises are likely to affect kids under the age of 5. And also, air pollution can lead to heart and lung. Of course.
What you just said at first was totally absurd because according to NASA.gov, it is impossible to stop climate change even if the world stopped all of our emissions because the world would still be going on heating up for at least the next 30 or 40 years. What can you say about that?
First of all, you should know that most of the investors are committing themselves to lower their emissions, which means that we can control our emissions to the atmosphere. So like I said, first and foremost, furthermore, in the climate change equation, there are two sets of countries. Countries that pollute the world with their emissions, and countries that are affected by these climate crises. Morocco is part of the second group of countries to be affected by climate change. In recent years, it has suffered huge losses, such as droughts, high temperatures, floods, the shrinking of arable areas, and the economy suffers as a result. What about future generations? What are we supposed to say? Sorry? Sorry we left you with our messed up planet? Sorry we were too preoccupied with ourselves? Sorry we listened to people who made excuses to do nothing? Is that what we are supposed to say? Future generations desperately need us to act now, to give them a chance when it's their turn. Animals, species species are already being impacted by climate change. It is limiting their ability to adapt to their environment. According to the IUCN Red List of Threatened Animals, climate change affects at least 10.967 species. And according to the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, 20 to 30% of all plants and animals will be at risk of extinction. Scientists, however, believe that climate change is moving too fast for animals to keep up. As an example, the Melamys rubicola. The Melamys rubicola was a brown, small rodent. It is the first animal to be reported as gone extinct as a direct result of climate change because its habitat was destroyed by rising sea levels. The effect of climate change on even the smallest species can destroy ecosystems, can destroy them, and if jungles, oceans, and other natural habitats are impacted, local plants and animals will recede or die off. Thank you.
Dear opponents, instead of simply talking about how climate change has affected our lives and us, why don't you try to give solutions to fully eradicate it? Little spoiler, you can't. It's impossible. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I am more than delighted to be standing here again for the first time this year. Words can describe how desperately I've missed this courteous feeling. And with that being said, let us begin. As the dear Prime Minister already stated, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, prevent or avert means to stop something from happening, continuing or developing. On the other hand, climate change adaptations are precautions and actions taken to reduce the negative impact of climate change while still taking advantage of potential new opportunities. So the real question here would be, are we mere humans really in power to eradicate, prevent, fully stop climate change? Well, to avert it, there are unfortunately only two options. The first one is to reduce the energy coming from the sun to the globe. And I assume that you, dear opponents, are smart enough to know that this is just impossible. The second scenario, on the other hand, would be to remove carbon dioxide from the Earth's atmosphere. This one, however, is quite possible, but flawed. According to Susan Solon, Emily's climatologist, carbon dioxide has already altered the world's atmosphere for at least 1,000 years to come. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, 1,000 years to come, and this is not even the full picture. Well, we have to admit that removing CO2 from our atmosphere would make quite a change in the world's climate in the year 3000. But it would cost us if we are very, very, very positive. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. This is helping us because this is not avert. Avert means to fully stop, and this is what I said before. But what you are saying now is to adapt, to plant trees, to like green houses, etc. are things used by countries to adapt and not avert, not eradicate. Thank you again.
We could plant trees.
There is only one POI.
There is two POI.
Well, what was I saying? And we have to admit that removing CO2 from our atmosphere would make quite a change in the world's climate in the year 3000. But it would cost us, if we are very, very, very optimistic and positive, around $2.4 trillion, which is approximately 3% of the world's economy. So good luck, dear opponents, on raising that much money and still failing to prevent climate change. Let me tell you something. Climate change is by now locked. And let's picture something together. Imagine if we eradicated the main cause of climate change, which is greenhouse emissions. Well, the world's temperature would simply continue to rise. And this is not coming from me. I am no climatologist, but from Richard B. Rickey, the well-known climate scientist, University of Michigan. And if you don't believe me, you should hear about Sukuru Manabe, Susan Solin, Phil D. Jones, James E. Hansen, and a plethora of very skilled scientists that, just like me, strongly believe that climate change is by now irreversible, and it has already been altered by our activities since 1850. Thank you.
We should adapt to climate change rather than avert it. I'm strictly against the motion. Ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, members of the juries, it's an honor to speak to you this afternoon. Furthermore, it's an honor to speak against such a competent government. Anyways, for nearly 3 decades, the United Nations has been bringing together almost every country on Earth for global climate summits, called COPs, which stands for Conference of the Parties. In that time, climate change has gone from being a fringe issue to a global priority, which means things are getting serious. Almost every country is trying to avoid climate change because we are responsible for almost everything that is happening around the world. Global warming is caused by human activities. China is one of the most polluted countries, but the air pollution has decreased because of the novel coronavirus in China. This shows how much human activities have an impact on the quality of the air that we breathe. You said that we can't control the disasters. Yes, we can control the air pollution.
Since the beginning, you guys have been talking about scientific resolutions and solutions, but do you know the amount of money we need? And do you have this amount of money?
Yes, we can do it. India was ranked 22nd best in the world. She can control air pollution even though she's considered as a poor country.
What is
even
your
though
source?
She is Sorry?
What is your source?
My sources are, you can see from an Oxford debate. They told us that India was ranked 22nd best in the world in renewables energy. So, as I said, China is one of the most polluted countries in the world, but the air pollution has decreased because of the novel coronavirus in China. This shows how much human activities have an impact on the quality of the air that we breathe. We must act to save our planet. There are many ways to avoid and therefore stop. Recently, a question was asked simply, what is the solution of global warming? Mike Huckabee said, the most important thing about global warming is this: whether humans are responsible for the bulk of the climate change, but it's going to be left to the scientists. But it's all of our responsibility to leave this planet in better shape for future generations. As he said, we should think about future generations. We should not be selfish, because by trying to adapt to climate change, we're just letting things getting worse. Moreover, we can reach a time when we can no longer breathe. Oceans are rising, fires are raging, and we need solutions fast. You said that we can't give solution, the member of the government. Yes, we can. I can give you some solutions. And they can successfully prevent. There are renewable energies. Yes, we can use renewable energies. A renewable energy is an energy that is collected from the renewable resources that are naturally replenished on a human time scale. It includes sources such as sunlight, wind, rain, waves, and geothermal heat. This means that renewables are displacing dirty fossil fuels on the power sector, offering the benefits of lower emissions of carbon and other types of pollutions. Hydrogen engine. I suggest hydrogen engine. There are some pretty big difference between hydrogen engine and gas-powered motors. Instead of toxic nitrogen oxide gases, hydrogen motors produce water as the main byproduct of their combustion cycle. Because of the heat also produced by the engines, there are still some harmful nitrogen oxide emissions, but not nearly as much as a gas engine produces. We, as eagles of oligarchy, must be educated to protect our environment. In fact, discussing climate change here this evening means that we are engaging with it. Thank you.
For the past few minutes, I've been trying to analyze and understand what you guys have been saying, but I just couldn't. All I've been hearing was you guys talking about mitigation, which is reducing climate change, but that is not our subject. You can see it right over there. It's about aversion. Besides, I feel like y'all are dreaming about going back to the past centuries where we didn't have climate change, but that is impossible. This is reality. So I'm going to put y'all in front of a dilemma right now. It's either you propose rational and efficient solutions or you disappear. And I dare you to find something better than adaptation. Thank you.
Psychological impacts. Climate change causes a number of psychological effects on the Earth's inhabitant. These include emotional states such as eco-anxiety, eco-grief, and eco-anger. While in present, such emotions are often not harmful and can be a rational response to the degradation of the natural world, motivating adaptive actions. Other effects, such as post-traumatic stress, can be more dangerous. There are three broad channels by which climate change affects people's mental states: directly, indirectly, or via awareness. The direct channel includes stress-related conditions being caused by exposure to extreme weather events. The indirect pathway can be via disruption to economic and social activities. And last but not least, the third channel can be of mere awareness of the climate change threat, even by individuals who are not otherwise affected by it. There are many exceptions, but generally it is people in developing countries who are more exposed to the direct impacts and economic disruptions. Thank you.
So we're really tired of repeating the same things over and over again, where you're given our ways of adapting and not solutions. Anyways, after Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, it states that evolution happens by natural selection. Individuals that are poorly adapted to their environment are less likely to survive and reproduce, which means that organisms that are more adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and pass on the genes that aided to their success. So I'm kindly asking you to stop being this pessimistic, because in order to find the right road, you cannot ask darkness to leave, but you must turn on the light. Thank you.
I would like to ask you a simple question. Do you know what happened 5 weeks before COP26? Okay. I will answer you. Thousands of young environmental activists mobilized in several countries around the world to demand urgent action against climate change by increasing pressure on the government. Why do these young people do that? Quite simply, because we are running to our ruin. If you are convinced by the word of your disease, why do you continue to belong to this establishment, our dear Al-Laraki school, who, as you all know, promotes the environmental cause through its ideals, and therefore requires us a greater commitment efficient in protecting our environment, and therefore attempting to stem this climate change. Thank you, everyone.
I must stress again that our point has not been refuted by the other side. So I want to call your attention to this important point that our opponents have not addressed. Miss Member of the Opposition, adapting to climate change does not mean doing nothing. We all know we can't stop rising sea levels, but as I said before, in case you didn't hear me, there are a lot of adaptation strategies that we can make use of. Thanks.
If we don't stop climate change, not reduce it, if we don't stop it, it will undo a lot of the progress made over the past years in development, as we're already seeing current threats as water and food scarcity will end up to conflicts. Doing nothing will end up costing us much more if we don't act now to stop it. We can definitely address climate change, but we have to increase our efforts. The world took the first step to address climate change in the Paris Agreement, in which all countries are committed to stop and address climate change, and businesses, investors are committing themselves to lower their emissions, to stop climate change. By acting now, we save lives, money, and we avoid setbacks in the progress we have made. Thank you.
Dear Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I strongly respect your opinion, but you can't be against the fact that some countries, to not say all of them, has already started to adapt to these changes. And again, for the opposition's whip, the solutions you gave us are used to adapt, not to prevent, not to fully eradicate. To sum up, this is not about being optimistic or pessimistic. This is all about being realistic, and this is what you should be, dear opponents, because this is not a matter of mere child's dream. Thank you.
I'm answering the Prime Minister. Miss, you said that we can't, this is not our topic, but as I said, I'm strictly against the motion, so I have to give solutions, and the solutions in our government whip, the solutions that I give are to prevent. Anyways, we all see the molten ice sheets on the television almost every day, and we know about the burning of fossil fuels, and we do nothing. We will just say, oh my goodness, that's horrible, and we go back to living our everyday lives like nothing happened. The problem is that we no longer live in a society where the real power lies in the hand of people. So the solution to this problem must be top down, not bottom up. But if you're all engaged in the issue, we could really make a difference, both in our own way and by influencing those who have the power to change business and industry practices. Thank you.